For a generation of people, the words, "Smile, you're on Candid Camera," meant that an individual was about to discover the moment they had been in that was funny or challenging or weird or difficult was about to become a national TV moment. The creator of that show, Alan Funt, worked for years to develop a format where a person who didn't know the camera was on would engage with the world around them in a way that became interesting for them and for the viewer at home. Now, he came to this process years before the television show when he was stationed in Oklahoma during World War II as part of the Army Signal Corps. He did recordings for radio programs for the base. And one of the things Alan Funt would do was record soldiers for gripe sessions. They could come into his office in view of large recording equipment and complain about their uniforms or the food or commanding officer, generally made anonymous, to build a sense of morale and solidarity among the troops. And he discovered a dynamic early on that people behave differently when they know they're being recorded. He would take a soldier, sit them down, ask them about their life and stories. He said they would be energetic and funny, passionate. They would tell colorful stories with a smile on their face. And then he would switch on the recording equipment. A red light would come on to say, "You're on." And all of a sudden, that same dynamic, funny, outgoing person became rigid and boring. They would say the right lines instead of how they actually felt, say what they thought they were supposed to say, and lose their passion and creativity. People behaved differently when the camera or the microphone was on. He also discovered that if you just recorded people without them knowing it, that sometimes it was pretty boring. They would just go about their lives. So he introduced a technique called the reel. And this became an opportunity to take a real person and interject a strange moment to see how they would react. This turned into a show called Candid Microphone. He would go into a tailor's shop with a microphone under his suit jacket and ask that a suit be made for a kangaroo and see how the tailor responded. Over time, this became the television show that so many of us know, Candid Camera. He said that in order for it to be interesting, it had to be real. The person had to be a real person who didn't know that they were being recorded, but something extra had to be injected. It had to be highly scripted reality. There's one segment that became famous called the elevator segment. A man is on an elevator standing alone wearing a hat. Multiple other individuals get onto the elevator with him, all part of the gag, also wearing hats, and one by one, they slowly take their hat off for no reason at all. But by the end of the elevator going up to the top floor, the man is looking around, realizing that no one else has a hat on, and so he too, not knowing why, takes off his hat. Then, as the ride continues, everyone else slowly, one by one, begins to put the hat back on. As expected, by the end of the ride, the man looks around, sees that now everyone's got their hat back on, and puts his on as well. We behave differently when we know that people are watching. The crowd and the camera changes us. Now, in this time in our culture, in this time in our society, we act like the camera is always on us because for many of us it is, and we put it there. We walk around with cameras in our pockets, posting our thoughts and ideas on social media and websites, taking pictures of our friends, and so often it would be tempting for us to present that version of reality differently because we know that someone is watching on the other side. It would be easy to live our lives as a performance instead of an act of presence. To put just the right filter on the picture, to get just the right angle in a room to make it look a little better than it does, to take 4,000 pictures of ourselves before we find just the right one that looks like the real us. It's easy in our lives when we know that the camera is on or the crowd is around us to stop playing our character and become a caricature of ourselves. to live a performance for others. Now me, I'm a terminal, pathological extrovert. And I know that I can often not know what I think or feel until other people are in the room to think and feel it with me. And I'm in a job that comes with all sorts of baggage around it in terms of the character. How's a minister supposed to act or think? I even have a costume sometimes. But I know that in life, when we know that the camera is on and the crowd is around us, it's sometimes easy to fall into a role that might not feel like the real you in life. That might feel like a performance instead of presence. Now, sometimes that peer pressure can be a good thing. Think of the last few weeks in our society. Amidst tragedy around racial injustice and a virus, people are talking about racial justice who weren't just a matter of weeks ago. It's all over the news and politicians. It seems like every company I interact with suddenly wants to tell me how much they care about Black lives. Mattress companies and Netflix. Everyone is talking about racial justice, and that peer pressure, that social pressure, that conversation bubbling up that people know is important is a good thing. There are politicians and clergy people speaking out. Why did so many of us have to wait until the cameras were on to do and say the right thing? Our spiritual lives are meant to be an authentic reaction to ourselves, to God, and to the world and others that we interact with. And yet it is far too easy sometimes to perform for the cameras, to live for the expectations of other people, instead of living and saying what we know to be most true with us and our God. I think there's this human dynamic, this tension in being a person where at the very same time we want to be seen and known and absolutely hide from being seen and known. As a human being, I often feel myself saying, I want you to know me just as I am. I am terrified that you might know me just as I am. I want to be seen and known fully by God. I'm afraid of what would happen if that was the case. Think of the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible. These two characters whose name in Hebrew means something like dirt creature and life giver, who eat fruit that's designed to make them more like God, more enlightened, more aware, more deeply in relationship with God. And when it happens, the first thing that they do is discover who they are and what they look like and go run and hide in the bushes. For some people, God is the ultimate audience, the one that we perform for, whether for better or for worse. I know sometimes even in my private prayer life, I will find myself performing for God instead of just offering authentic words and thoughts about what I desire most in my life or in the world. I'll catch myself saying the right words instead of the real ones, thinking that there's a script I'm supposed to follow. We humans are made to be in relationship. We're social creatures. The people who study evolutionary biology and the people who wrote the Bible knew it. When the text in Genesis says that Adam, Adama, earth creature, dirt thing, shouldn't be by itself. And yet, even though that we're made for relationship, how much of who we are gets covered up and hindered, how much goodness expressed in our relationship with ourselves and God and others gets hindered when we live for the expectations of others. As if the camera's always on, as if we're looking for likes or shares to fit in or to say the right lines. One of the things I really love about the Walt Whitman poem that we read this week in our class in worship and in this Sunday is that Whitman discovers he's connected to everyone who has ever lived in every body and every identity, he says, on this world or any world, when he was alone on the beach at night. It took him stepping back in a moment of fruitful solitude, looking up at the stars, hearing the movement of the waves, to remember that he is held by a reality that has held all things for all time. That there is some common thread, some similarity that moves all creatures and all lives, that hearts break and are healed, that people have loves and fears, himself included. The words that stood out most to me in his poem were "Old Mother." The God that he finds on the beach, moving in and out with the breath of the ocean. Old Mother, he says. On the beach, alone at night, he discovers a truth about the holy. It can hold us and also holds all people without exception. He meets a God there that loves you, but not more than anybody else, and certainly no less. The same water of the ocean that holds you up is powerful and dangerous, and Old Mother will ask for our costumes back before this is all said and done. For me, there's a great grace in that. For me, what it says is that the more I can practice stepping away from the camera and stepping away from the crowd, the more graceful I am with the people in my life. The more I practice being somewhere like on the beach at night alone, whether literally or figuratively, the more I practice just being who I am in the presence of people I love or God or myself, the easier it is to accept and love others just as they are. There's a grace that comes when the camera's turned off and we move away from the crowds. We move to presence instead of performance. See, this life, the big show, will be over before we know it. And the purpose of a spiritual life, one of the key purposes at all to developing a spiritual life, is to live what is real while we still have a chance. To choose presence over performance over and over again. For me, that involves being aware of the characters and roles that we play. There's nothing wrong with them. Father, minister, friend, citizen. But sometimes, no matter what those roles and characters are for me or you, they can become caricatures. We can be so focused on saying the right lines that we stop living what's real. And when we start identifying with those characters and not questioning them, they can have harmful impacts in our society at large and in our private lives. To choose presence over performance means that we have to make space in our lives to turn the camera off and step away from the crowd. It means that we have to build into our days or our years cycles of pause and reflection where we ask, is this the character I'm performing or is this me? Is my audience people I'm trying to please or a God who loves me? And how do I relate with authenticity and presence? This show will not last forever. The point is to live a real life with presence while you still have a chance. And so whether figuratively or literally, we practice turning the camera off and stepping away from the crowd from time to time so that we can step back in. But we do it long enough to remember that the creature behind the camera and in front of it, that you are unique, but no more special than anyone else and no less. Your heart beats and breaks like others. You have visions and dreams and hopes and fears like so many before you and after you. My guess is that you stumble and make mistakes and get back up again like others before you and after you. That you sometimes feel broken and sometimes break things, that you sometimes feel holy and powerful and weak sometimes in the same day like all creatures. To feel that life as it is, the real life, one of the surest ways to connect with others and yourself with grace. To accept this life as it is and fall in love with it over and over again. You are held and loved by the same old mother that Whitman found on the beach. No more than anyone else, and certainly no less. Find a moment in your life to step back from the crowd. A moment to stand on the beach at night alone in your own way. To connect with what is true in you, that is presence and not performance, because she will ask for her costumes back before we know it. And our job is to live a life that is very real while we still can. May it be so, and amen.